200 Comanche warriors don't circle a ranch by accident. They come for blood, for honor, or for vengeance too long denied. And that night, beneath a ragged moon and a wind that smelled of dust and distant fire, Silas Boone stood barefoot on the splintered porch of his cabin, hands empty, heart heavy as a headstone. He didn't reach for a rifle. He hadn't owned one in years, not since the day he buried his boy beside a crooked fence post, and his wife not long after, wrapped in the same blanket he now kept for winter ghosts. The prairie was holding its breath. Far off, war drums rolled across the dry hills like thunder, dragging its feet. Boom, boom, boom. Folks in town said Silas Boone had lost his mind, said he'd taken in a Comanche girl like she was a stray dog, as if kindness was something a man could afford west of the Pecos. They said he'd signed his own death sentence, that no warrior would care why the girl was there, only that she was. But Silas Boone never lived for what folks said. He lived for quiet mornings, for the sound of wind in cottonwood trees, for the memory of a child's laughter in a house now too still. And that night, as 200 shadows on horseback gathered beneath the moon, he chose not fear, but the truth, even if truth was the last thing he'd ever stand for. The sun didn't shine that day. It punished. Heat peeled paint off posts and split the dirt like cracked skin. Silas Boone was fixing a fence near the creek when he saw her. A figure, small, stumbling, all bones and dust, maybe 8 years old, maybe younger. Her dress was torn Comanche cloth, caked in red earth. She walked like someone whose body had forgotten how. Most ranchers out here would have grabbed a rifle, but Silas had buried his rifle long ago. Same day, he buried his wife and boy. Now he just raised his hands and stepped out of the shade. The girl didn't flinch. She moved toward the creek, toward water, toward the only thing still kind in a world that wasn't. He didn't know her name, didn't know what brought her here. All he knew was, the plains don't send ghosts unless something's gone wrong. And this girl? She looked like every wrong thing the West had ever done, wrapped into a child's frame, and still breathing. Inside the cabin, it was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that heals, but the kind that waits. The kind that makes old wood creak even when no one moves. The air was thick with heat and something else, something heavier than dust. Silas placed the girl on his only chair. She sat like a dropped rag doll, limbs loose, head tilted forward. Not a word, not a sound. Her eyes locked on the iron stew pot resting above a low flame, like it was the last fire left in the world. He moved quickly, ripped a hunk of bread from a round he'd baked that morning, stirred the stew, careful not to scrape too loud, found an old tin bowl with a dent near the rim, poured slow, steady, venison and beans still warm, not hot. When the smell hit her, her eyes lifted, just barely. But Silas saw it, that flicker, like a match trying to stay lit in the wind. He knelt beside her and offered the bowl. Her small hands trembled as they reached forward, and just as she clutched the rim, he saw it. A necklace, half hidden beneath the torn collar of her dress, beads strung in a pattern older than Texas, bright glass, bone white, blood red, delicate and deliberate, unmistakable. Silas froze. His breath caught as his mind snapped back to a week ago. Old Zeb Rollins, eyes clouded from too much sun and whiskey, had leaned across the saloon table and whispered about a pattern he'd once seen. "The Red Hawk clan," he'd said. "No one else wears that beadwork. Sacred stuff. Family stuff. Now it was hanging from the neck of a starving child in Silas Boone's cabin. His gut turned. If this girl was who he feared she was, he wasn't feeding some lost soul anymore. He was harboring the daughter of Chief Red Hawk, the war chief whose name turned bar fights into silence, whose riders were said to leave nothing but smoke and scorched iron behind. If they thought he'd taken her, if they even wondered, there'd be no talk, no questions, just war. And in that moment, stew in one hand, fear in the other, Silas realized he may have just traded mercy for death. The girl had eaten and fallen asleep in the chair, her thin frame wrapped in Silas' only blanket like wind curling inside old canvas. She didn't make a sound, only breathed, slow and shallow, as though even sleep was something she had to sneak past death to find. Silas sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching the fire die down to orange ghosts. The stew pot still steamed lightly, scent of venison and pepper filling the air, but he couldn't smell it anymore. His thoughts were elsewhere, back in Palo Duro Canyon, back in a tent filled with laughter he could never bring back. Then came the sound. Hooves! Fast, pounding, too many for a calm visit. They struck the dirt hard and wild, like someone was chasing hell or running from it. Silas stood slowly, fingers brushing the old Winchester he hadn't touched in years, only to leave it where it lay. Through the window, dust kicked high under the last rays of sun. 3 riders, and he knew all 3. Hank Tillman, his nearest neighbor, loud, loyal, reckless. Deputy Eli Granger, sharp jaw, tighter conscience. And Reverend Cole Mercer, who didn't leave the chapel unless God gave him cause. They didn't wait for pleasantries. "Silas, you damn fool!" Hank barked the moment his boots hit dirt. "What the hell have you done?" Eli's face was pale, eyes sharp with tension. "We saw smoke signals, West Ridge, Comanche. They're out, searching, might be for her." Silas didn't answer. He could feel the girl's breath behind him, soft wear, warm, too trusting. He remembered how she'd looked when the stew hit her nose, how her eyes flared just a little, how she reached with hands that hadn't held anything but fear for days. He could lie, send these men away, buy himself time. But time to do what, Silas? To run? To beg? To watch this cabin burn with her inside? He turned, eyes not leaving the fire. "I couldn't leave her," he said at last. "She would have died out there." Reverend Mercer stepped forward, voice low. "Do you understand what this means, son?" Silas nodded. Eli glanced toward the door, then back at Silas. "She's Chief Red Hawk's daughter. Been missing 3 days. They say she wandered during that storm that rolled through. If they think you took her—" "They won't think," Hank growled. "They'll act. They'll torch this ranch and drag the bones to the river. And if we're nearby, we go with it." Silas exhaled slowly. Smoke from the fire curled up like a warning. Eli stepped back toward his horse. "I have to ride back. Tell the sheriff, but I'll give you a head start." "A head start to where?" Silas snapped. "She can't walk a mile. And if I ride into a Comanche camp at night, they won't ask. They'll shoot." "Then figure it out," Eli said tight. "That's your problem now." Reverend Mercer lingered a second longer. "If you meant what you said," he murmured, "then don't let that girl die for it." Then the 3 men mounted and rode hard into the falling dusk, hooves cracking the silence like dry bone. Silas stood there long after the dust settled, alone again. except for the weight of the girl's slow, steady breath. And the war he felt galloping ever closer. Night fell like a slow avalanche, not crashing, but pressing down inch by inch, smothering the prairie in a silence thick as wool. The last streaks of sun bled out behind the hills, spilling red over the dry ridges like an open wound, then disappearing into black. The wind died. Even the grass seemed to hold still, as if the land knew better than to make a sound. Stars blinked into being one by one, not bright, not proud, just watching. Distant eyes in a sky that had seen this all before. Inside the cabin, Silas lit the lantern. The flame stuttered in protest, then steadied. Its glow painted gold across the wooden walls, catching dust motes like fireflies trapped in a jar. He checked the door, latched it, then slid an old trunk across it, his hands moving by habit, not belief, because men like Silas didn't really think they could stop what was coming. But they braced anyway. Luyu slept on the cot, curled into herself, so still she looked more shadow than girl. But her face twitched, eyelids fluttered, and her mouth moved like it was speaking to something only dreams could see. One hand gripped the blanket with the desperation of someone who once let go and paid the price. Silas didn't sit, didn't drink. He just stood by the table, hands on the back of the chair, eyes locked on nothing, because something was coming, and his bones knew it before his mind did. Then came the sound, low, deep, a single boom, rolling like thunder under the dirt. Then another, boom, boom, not fast, not panicked, measured, like a heart, carved from stone. Silas moved to the window. Boots creaked but didn't speak. He looked out into the dark. There was nothing, just black hills, empty sky. But the sound, it was there, in the ground, in his ribs, in the floorboards under his feet, like the wood remembered being a tree in a war-torn forest. He didn't have to ask, didn't need translation. These weren't raider drums, not a warning, not a chase. These were ceremonial. They were final, and they were getting closer. The air changed, grew tighter. Even the silence between the drums grew louder, like something old and angry was coming home. He turned from the window, and Luyu was awake. She hadn't stirred, hadn't gasped, just opened her eyes, wide, black, still. She was sitting up now, slow and quiet. Her eyes didn't look at him. They looked beyond him, as if the wall was telling stories. Then she spoke, fast, urgent. Her hands moved, pointed to the door, then herself. Silas didn't need to know the words. He nodded. "I know." She stood, took his shirt in both fists, and pulled. Then, with a grim face no child should wear, she lifted her fingers. 10, 20, 30. Silas watched, each number falling like a stone in his gut. 40, 50, 100. She didn't stop. Not until she reached 200. He staggered back. The lantern in his hand swayed. The flame fluttered like even it wanted to run. He had hoped for a search party, a dozen riders, maybe 15, something he could speak to, something that listened. But this wasn't a search. This was a sentence. The drums grew louder. Then they stopped. No fade, no echo, just gone, like someone had sliced the sound from the world. The silence that followed was worse, because the coyotes didn't return, the wind didn't whisper, even the night bugs held their breath. Silas realized they weren't coming at dawn. They were already here. Silas stood in the dark with a rifle he wouldn't fire and a heart he couldn't quiet. The drums had stopped, but the air throbbed like it still heard them. He paced once, twice, then walked to the shelf and pulled down a tin box. Inside, a scrap of torn cloth, a piece of Luyu's dress that had snagged on his fence post. He wrapped it in a piece of old leather and shoved it into his coat. If tonight went to hell, at least he had something that told the truth. Lantern in hand, he opened the door slowly. 200 riders waited like statues chiseled from war. And at their center, Chief Red Hawk. The old warrior sat tall, hair silver-threaded and eyes black as midnight. His presence alone made the wind feel nervous. A voice rang out, deep, measured. "You hold what belongs to us. Send her out, or be taken in pieces." Silas stepped out, arms raised. Behind him, Luyu clung to his side. She whispered in Comanche, gesturing. Her, the cabin, Silas. Red Hawk's eyes narrowed. He dismounted and walked toward them. When he stopped, the world held its breath. "My daughter says you fed her, sheltered her." "I did," Silas said. "She was starving." "You saw the beads. You knew." "I did. I was going to return her at dawn. She couldn't ride." Red Hawk's jaw tightened. "And if you had the chance again?" Silas hesitated. "I'd do it again, even knowing this." The warriors shifted. One stepped forward. Iron Tooth. He pointed a spear at Silas's chest. "Mercy," he spat, "is cowardice in disguise." Silas held his ground. "Then call me coward, but I won't regret saving a child." The tension crackled like firewood. Luyu shouted, loud, urgent. She stood between them again, but this time Silas gently stepped in front of her. He reached into his coat and pulled out the scrap of her dress. "This caught on my fence," he said, holding it up. "She came to me, alone, dying." Red Hawk stared at the cloth for a long time, then nodded once. "You may have saved her," he said slowly, "but her word is not enough for all. You'll ride with us, stand before the council, speak your truth to men who have buried daughters." Silas looked around at warriors ready to kill him, at Luyu still shaking behind him, and nodded. "If words can stop arrows, I'll find the right ones." But inside he wasn't sure, because out here even truth sometimes died before daylight. The ride into the hidden Comanche Valley was long, silent, and steeped in shadow. Silas rode beside Chief Red Hawk, but no words passed between them, only hoofbeats and the weight of the future on tired saddle leather. When they arrived, the village glowed like a nest of stars, fires flickering between canvas lodges. At the center stood a great circle of stone and ash where 7 elders waited, unmoving, unreadable. Silas dismounted, and for the first time since the war drums, he felt afraid. Red Hawk spoke. "This man claims mercy. Let us see if it survives scrutiny." Then Silas stepped forward, alone, no interpreter, no allies. He cleared his throat, holding the scrap of Luyu's dress in one hand and a photograph in the other. "My name is Silas Boone," he said. "I'm no hero. I'm just a man who buried a wife and a son and couldn't bury his decency." He passed the photo to the nearest elder. Nayla's face smiled up from the frame. Beside her, a small boy with bright eyes, now long gone. "My wife," he said. "Her name was Nayla. She was Comanche. Your people never knew, because she feared they'd disown her for marrying me." A murmur rose, but no anger, only silence wrapped in grief. "One night a storm hit," Silas continued, "and a child, starving, stumbled onto my land. I gave her food and warmth and nothing more." He lifted the cloth. "This was on my fence. She wasn't taken. She was lost." Then, quietly, "I would have returned her. But I waited till morning, thinking I had time. I was wrong." The white-haired elder finally spoke. "What would you do now if another Comanche child came to your door tonight?" Silas met his gaze. "Feed them, again and again, till I die." The fire popped. Then Iron Tooth rose, scowling. "Words are wind," he said. "Anyone can weep, but truth cuts deeper." He stepped toward Silas, lifted a knife, and dropped it at the cowboy's feet. "If you speak truth, take the blade," he challenged. "Cut your palm. Bleed for the girl's safety." Silas didn't hesitate. He picked up the knife, drew it across his palm, and let the blood fall to the dust. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about what kind of men we choose to be." Luyu stepped forward now, holding her bracelet, silent but fierce. But this time it wasn't the bracelet that swayed them. It was Silas. The elders murmured again. Then the eldest stood, eyes like winter coals. "He did not steal," he declared. "He gave, in a world where few do." Then, raising his hand, "Let no harm come to Silas Boone. Let his ranch be sacred ground." Red Hawk placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. "Now they see what I saw. Not a thief, not a fool, but a man." And Silas, though tired, stood tall, because for the first time in years the ghosts on his shoulders felt quiet. Dawn didn't break that morning. It unfolded, slow, gentle, like the sky itself was exhaling after holding its breath all night. No war cries, no galloping hooves, only the hush of golden light pouring over sleeping tents and warriors weary from decisions, not battle. Silas stood beside Chief Red Hawk at the edge of the village. He was no longer judged, no longer outsider. Something had changed, not just in them, in him too. Luyu walked ahead, her chin held high, the woven bracelet snug around her wrist like a badge of honor. She had become more than a daughter, more than a child. She was now a voice of peace, of truth, of remembering. "Come," Red Hawk said, his tone softer than ever before. "Your home waits, but your name will remain among us." Silas gave a nod, but his heart, for once, had no words, only gratitude. He mounted the same horse they'd brought him in on, but this time he didn't ride in shame or uncertainty. He rode at the head of the line. Behind him, a full honor guard of Comanche warriors followed, not to watch him, to walk with him. When they crested the final ridge and his ranch came into view, Silas slowed. He hadn't seen it in 2 days, but it felt like years, like he'd left a man with one past and returned with another. On the porch, Luyu dismounted. She climbed the steps barefoot and placed something on the table, a small carved stone shaped like a hawk, wings spread. "It means," she said in careful English, "we are watching, but not with fear, with hope." Silas smiled, a smile that cracked years of silence across his face. She stepped forward, hugged him tight, fierce like a daughter, gentle like a friend. "Thank you," she whispered. "You fed me. Now I feed the fire for peace." From that day, things shifted. Silas's ranch became something rare, something whispered about from Amarillo to Abilene, a patch of land where Comanche and settler could sit, not shoot, where treaties weren't signed but shared over bread and coffee. He never grew rich, never chased fame, but his porch was never empty. Some came seeking forgiveness, some came carrying ghosts, but all left lighter. Luyu grew into a woman carved of prairie wind and spirit. She moved between two worlds, writing, speaking, healing. But every year, on one sacred night, the night of the war drums, she returned. They ate stew, tore bread, and stared into the flames, not with fear, but with memory. Silas Boone died at 73, peacefully, in his sleep beneath stars that knew his story. At his funeral, two groups stood side by side, Comanche and settler. No weapons, only hats in hand and tears in eyes. He was buried on the hill that overlooked the creek where he'd first seen a starving girl stumbling toward water. And on his stone someone carved words simple and eternal. He fed a child and fed a future. Out on the frontier, justice was often carried in a holster, and mercy rarely left its mark. But sometimes, once in a rare while, a man does something so simple, so small, that it echoes louder than a gunshot. Silas Boone didn't win a war. He didn't tame the West. He just fed a starving girl. And from that bowl of stew came peace where there should have been fire. He stood alone when it was easier to run. He listened when others would have shouted. And because of that, because of kindness, a war never happened. We remember legends for their battles, but maybe we should also remember them for the ones they prevented. The trail he rode was long, dusty, and lonely, but Silas left something behind, a bridge between two worlds once built on fear. And in the end, it wasn't a bullet that saved the day. It was bread, a blanket, and the brave voice of a child who believed a cowboy could be good. So if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads between fear and decency, silence and courage, remember this: sometimes feeding a stranger is braver than drawing a gun. And sometimes the most powerful man in the West is the one who chooses not to shoot.